Story 1. Anything related to veterinary medicine. Playing with and cuddling puppies and kittens constitutes maybe 3% of what we spend our days doing. Story 2. Anything involving travel. I was a consultant for years and it was entirely on site with the client until COVID-19. I flew all over the United States and sat in offices and hotel rooms for months on end. As a side note, you know you are traveling too much when the airport restaurant staff knows you at an airport that has never been your start or destination. Story 3. Running your own cafe is often romanticized, but it involves considerable effort managing suppliers, maintaining standards, and more. Story 4. I have noticed a significant trend of individuals romanticizing blue-collar work. It is draining depending on who you work for and what you do. There is a lack of family life balance in some areas, and it takes a major toll on your body. I see people come into my mill and leave after the lunch break, after they talk about all the money they are going to make until they do the actual work. The money makes it sound appealing. Supporting the family is everything. However, I see many people do not last, which is honestly for the best for some. Story 5. Graphic design is a career with a high risk of burnout. Even though it is a passion for many, it often feels like everyone is a better designer than you, and everyone has opinions, many of which are not valid in design terms. Just because you do not like something does not mean it is not a good design, and just because you have a favorite color does not mean it will work in every design. Review processes can be exhausting. I understand there are many harder and more stressful jobs, but graphic design is often perceived as fun when the reality is frequently different. Story 6. All these responses have validated my belief that you should choose a profession based on your tolerance for the worst possible day in that profession. Thank you. Story 7. Dog trainer. I love dogs. I wish I could play with puppies all day. I wish I could too. We mostly deal with serious behavior issues like aggression and separation anxiety, things that tear a family apart. Even then, we are mostly working with the people, not the dogs. Sometimes we have to convince them to do what needs to be done. They hired us as the experts, but hear things like, I grew up with dogs, and we didn't do it that way. Or he knows he did wrong. Or it isn't working. What have you practiced since last time? I've been busy. The people are harder than the dogs, except when the dogs are in trouble and you can't help them because the clients, for whatever reason, won't let you. That hurts. Then there are the dogs that you know should not be in the home or any home. Many rescue groups pull dogs from the shelter and adopt them out without doing temperament testing. You don't know the bite history or anything about them, but they're cute. Always foster first, or find a rescue that fosters and does testing before allowing the dog to be adopted. Anyway, I love my job. I really do. Story 8. Being a doctor, you realize how limited your capacity is to change lives. You see an excessive amount of bureaucracy. When you spend extra time caring for people, your patients complain that things take too long. You are constantly threatened with lawsuits. You are overwhelmed with debt. You lose an entire decade of your life. Your day-to-day work is incredibly stressful and unforgiving. You face challenges from all angles. 0 out of 10 would not recommend. Story 9. Okay, so from the comments, literally every job we could possibly think of is included. Thank you all, that is honestly comforting. Story 10. Librarian. People think we sit around all day reading books and shushing people. In reality, most public-facing library workers deal with all kinds of wild behavior daily. Story 11. I would argue that it is not the actual duties of the job that people end up disliking. It is the politics, bureaucracy, and people that cause it to lose its appeal. Story 12. Archaeology. I know from an acquaintance of a local professor who starts off the 101 class lecture with, if you decided to become an archaeologist because of the Indiana Jones or Tomb Raider movies, you're going to have a bad time. It's not even remotely close to being like that. I've heard there's always a handful of students who don't come back after that first class. Also, being a zookeeper requires a minimum of a master's degree for $12 to $14 an hour, day in and day out, cleaning the most vile literal piles of waste you can imagine, as well as being clawed, gored, trampled, bitten, and having to deal with being urinated, defecated, and vomited on. You end up smelling like hot garbage most of the day and have to deal with stupid, mean, and entitled human beings on top of it. It makes raising children look simple. Seriously, people, give your zookeeper a hug or at least an air hug, because you probably don't want to get what's on them on you. Story 13. Being a lawyer can be challenging. Many people find the work tedious and confrontational, leading them to leave the field. Story 14. Working for a professional sports team. Their hiring practices prefer interns to the lowest pay scale jobs. Unless you are extremely well connected or have an Ivy League Master of Business Administration degree, the chances of getting the big jobs are very small. The churn and burn is real. Story 15. Florist. Hallmark movies are misleading. Only about 20% of the work is actual floral design. The rest involves hauling heavy buckets of water and products, sanitizing, organizing, scrubbing, and other dirty, unglamorous chores. Pays very little. Fun fact: most arrangements are pre-designed. The florist simply assembles them. You usually do not get to be creative at work. You just follow the instructions. If you want to be creative with flowers, do it as a hobby. Story 16. Banking. I did it for nearly 2 decades. The regulations are very specific and strict. Company culture in banking can be toxic. Only people in high-level roles make good money, and getting into those roles can be very difficult. Everyone is expected to sell products, even to people who do not want them or, in some cases, should not have them. You are expected to treat people better simply because they have more money. Meanwhile, it can be emotionally difficult to turn someone down for a loan you know they desperately need, and there is significant prejudice against poor people. Story 17. Farming. It looks charming and appealing on social media when you see shallow, gingham dress-wearing aspiring influencers pretending to bake bread. However, it is much less appealing when it is 2 a.m. and you are up to your elbows in blood trying to save a dying animal that your livelihood depends on. Story 18. Public transportation. As a bus or train operator, you deal with demanding dispatch, unpleasant and entitled passengers, fights, dirty cars, and other vehicles. Additionally, your health is affected because you need energy but spend most of the time sitting. Story 19. Architects are often taught in university that they are experts who build the world. However, they frequently face reality by being overworked and underpaid by senior architects and lowballed by clients. Story 20. Author. You think fame, wealth, and notoriety, but in reality, it is spending hours alone, with your work getting rejected or receiving no attention 98% of the time. Story 21. Teaching is extremely stressful. The pay is terrible. You are constantly being scrutinized by parents, the media, and administrators. You are not allowed to enforce any kind of discipline or consequences in your classroom, or the parents will go over your head to the administrators and complain. The administrators will give in, and any consequence you assign becomes meaningless. Story 22. Working in a bookstore, many people think you can just read books all day and relax. In reality, you unload heavy loads of books, do a lot of lifting, sort out orders, and basically stand all day. Story 23. Trades. Just join the trades. Up at 4 a.m., home at 4 p.m. beat. No energy for anything but work, eating, bathing, and sleeping during the work week. Oh, and by the way, can you work overtime this weekend? Story 24. Any job in publishing, specifically editing. Poor pay. And now I cannot even enjoy reading anymore. Story 25. Any investigator of violent crimes or felonies knows the amount of paperwork required is overwhelming for very good reasons. Dealing with victims is often heartbreaking. Watching someone get away with murder is deeply depressing. Story 26. Marketing, especially social media. Thanks to shows like Emily in Paris, people think it is all glamorous outfits, cute cafes, and snapping perfect pictures, when in reality you are basically everyone's do-it-all assistant with zero credit. Everyone thinks they could do your job better because it is just posting content. Super thankless, especially in agencies. Also, to be honest, people act like it is life or death if a caption is not perfect or a reel does not go viral. Meanwhile, influencers are getting paid 5 times your salary for holding a smoothie and sending a one-line email. It is honestly wild. Story 27. Acting, especially in any role that is not the lead or main cast, can be challenging. Everyone treats you poorly, and you are often standing around in uncomfortable conditions for 12 to 16 hours straight. It takes even longer if you have makeup to apply, only to repeat the process the next day. Story 28. I got into content creation and was making roughly $5,000 to $10,000 a month doing user-generated content videos. You quickly end up feeling burned out because you wake up, get ready, and immediately have to start recording content while the sun is up. It's always very repetitive, uncreative, dishonest, and false advertising content where you put on a fake smile and pretend something is great. You also write the script, make sure it flows smoothly, edit, upload, then deal with the frustrating guidelines, technical issues, brand problems, and unfairness that large companies get away with because of their size. When the sun finally goes down, you are editing, uploading, planning tomorrow's content and advertisements to create, organizing the massive amount of unwanted promotional items you're forced to keep, and realizing that everything we own is unnecessary and how fake the internet feels. It's hard to connect with anyone because you feel like everyone is brainwashed. Story 29. Running any type of physical business of your own is challenging. Modern-day standards, regulations, permits, and bureaucracy have destroyed many hopes and dreams. Story 30. Baker. Such early mornings, low pay, working every weekend. You can't have a normal schedule because you have to be at work at 3 a.m. It sounds harsh in reality. Story 31. First response emergency medical services. Seems very impressive and like you are doing all this important work. There's a lot of important work to be done, but the majority of calls are routine, like stomach aches and nosebleeds, or interfacility transports unless you work in a busy city or with frequent violent incidents. It is also a significantly traumatizing career choice for the low pay that emergency medical services tend to offer. Story 32. Stand-up comedian. I did it for 9 years. Completely ruined my nervous system. The pressure to deliver, thinking about the fact that if you are not on top of your game every night, you will not have money for rent, and hoping that someday you will make it big, the chance is very low and mostly depends on luck. Being very good does not mean you will have success. Now I have a job doing stand-up only as a hobby, the best year of my life in a long time. Also, people in entertainment are the biggest narcissists and most toxic people you will ever find. Story 33. Chef. Glad people are finally accepting what chefs actually do, but the majority of people could not last a month in a professional kitchen. Not talking about fast food, but a 3 Michelin star restaurant. I did it for 3 decades, and the 10 years since I left have been the happiest, most peaceful years of my life. Every job I have had since has not even felt like work. Story 34. Not romanticizing it, but being a teacher is an underappreciated job. Some people think it is just going there and teaching and having 2 months of summer vacation. However, the hours you have to invest at home preparing lessons, revising exams and papers, handling bureaucracy, and calling your students family if you are their tutor are significant. Those 2 months of vacation are not true. We finish the course after the students and start the following one before them, and you still prepare things during those vacations. Story 35. Charlotte wanted my job as the event coordinator and office manager at the restaurant where we worked. She wanted it badly enough that she regularly tried to sabotage events to make me look bad. I eventually left for a better job, not because of her behavior, and she did get the position. A few weeks later, I was visiting my friend there and having some complimentary drinks when she had the nerve to complain to me about how hard her new job was. Story 36. I have worked many interesting tourism and nature jobs, including ski instructing, multi-day hiking guide, bike tour operator, and conservation work. While I enjoy the work, it does not pay well, and it is hard to find an employer who truly values employees. There are always many applicants, so employers do not worry much about staff retention. Therefore, working conditions are often not great. Of course, this varies greatly from employer to employer. Story 37. Airline pilot. I know people who left lucrative careers for a life of travel and exotic experiences, only to find it is mostly long, lonely hours in the cockpit, jet lag, and uncomfortable hotels. Story 38. Forensics. Crime scene investigators do not wear heels or drive fancy cars. They do not have all the advanced machines and cannot obtain DNA and fingerprint comparisons in 5 minutes. Story 39. For me, being famous or a celebrity seems like a prison. No privacy, everyone wanting a piece of you, the rumors and gossip. Absolutely not. Story 40. Veterinarian. Yes, you save animals, but it depends on the location where you work. I do not advise working in an emergency clinic. It is difficult when owners cannot afford care, and it is depressing. Story 41. Game tester. Sounds relaxing to play games all day and get paid for it. What you are actually doing is repeating the same things repeatedly to find bugs or glitches. Story 42. Wildlife rehabilitation. People think it is all about washing cute ducks after oil spills, but in reality, these animals often do not reach you until they are in very bad shape. Death or humane euthanasia is common because by the time a wild animal is so sick or injured that it can be captured and transported, it is often too late to save them. Not to mention, there is often a large demand for care but very little funding or resources. Do not get me wrong, it is amazing and rewarding work, but burnout and compassion fatigue are real. Story 43. Federal Air Marshal. You might think they run around the plane performing acrobatic takedowns of identified terrorists, but their job is literally sitting on a plane for hours watching everyone while trying to blend in. They cannot even sleep. Story 44. Florist. On television and in movies, we always see young women working with flowers. They look pretty and relaxed. It is really hard work and very seasonal, working with perishable products. On holidays or before big parties, you work long hours on your feet all day, lifting heavy buckets of water and more. Delivery is another big challenge on days like Valentine's Day or Mother's Day, when everyone wants their orders on the same day. In the northern regions, Valentine's Day can be brutally cold or snowy, and potholes are a hazard for vases of flowers. Delivering to weddings and parties is really hard work, hauling floral arrangements and props through back doors along with the catering staff. Setting up and tearing down happens on a tight timeline. I am so glad I am retired. Story 45. Fashion design. I honestly just wanted to design and make clothes, but you really had to deal with a lot of difficult people who wanted to sabotage your work for no reason. I was thinking, I have deadlines, go get a life. Plus, you ended up doing much more work than you were paid for. It was not worth it. Story 46. Any job that requires traveling for a living. Do not get me wrong, I still love my job and will continue doing it. However, I cannot remember which city I was in last week. It all just blurs together. It is not for everyone. Story 47. I was an emergency medical technician and paramedic for 40 years. It ruined me as a compassionate human being. Many new people go to school to do that job and are ruined in less than 2 years. I should have stayed with plumbing, as getting treated poorly in that job paid much better than getting treated poorly as a medic. Story 48. Veterinarian or veterinary technician. 20 years in the field, 10 in the emergency room and 10 in feline specialty. I had a mental breakdown. So much suffering and death. So few puppies and kittens healthy enough to snuggle. So much anger from pet owners screaming about how we are only in it for the money when we drive cars older than the person screaming. I loved my patients but hated the mental anguish. Veterinary staff have one of the highest suicide rates of any non-military job. I left the field and I no longer cry going to or coming home from work, while I make more money. Story 49. Medical professionals save lives by performing cardiopulmonary resuscitation. Patients do not just wake up like they do in the movies. Story 50. Zookeeping is physically and mentally demanding and generally poorly compensated. Your work is constantly debated, and everyone has an opinion on what you do, despite knowing nothing about it. Story 51. Archaeologist. Lots of waiting, paperwork, days without findings, getting rained on, and much more scientific than expected. Story 52. Being a cowboy was nothing but a lot of hard work, and from what I have read, it is still a lot of hard work. Story 53. Working in an advertising agency was a difficult and exhausting experience, even before the internet era. There was a heavy presence of drugs and alcohol among both clients and staff. Story 54. I guess there are still a lot of people who love it, but for me, it was working from home. I did customer service calls for Verizon from home for almost 4 years. It was great at first. I moved into a new apartment with my then girlfriend, and things were really looking up. Within a year, we broke up and she moved out. I began taking my breaks and lunch alone and was always by myself. I did go out on weekends to socialize, but it was a long wait to come around again. One day on my first break, I felt overwhelming dread at going back in, so I logged out and decided I was done. Took them 4 days to realize I was missing. I got a job at a gas station after that, and then one of my regulars got me a job where he works. I was promoted back in March, so I am a laboratory technician at a nuclear pharmacy now. It is so much better. If you work from home, I think it helps to have a good personal life, and I did not. Verizon paid really well, and for the most part, coworkers and leadership were good. But grinding through calls got really old. Maybe a different work-from-home job would not have been so bad. Story 55. Games testing. A job where I get to play games all day would be my dream. No, buddy, it really is not the dream job you think it is. Sure, you spend all day playing games, but you are not really playing them the way you normally would. You play the same small section repeatedly while trying to break it or replicate a bug. Then you try to figure out what is causing it and how to fix it. It is mind-numbingly boring, tedious, and frustrating. Story 56. Being a scientist, especially in industry, there is incredible pressure to make the impossible happen in an unreasonable time. Story 57. Software engineering is seen as an easy six-figure remote job, but in reality, that represents a minority of the industry. Want the amazing pay? Now you are working 60+ hours a week at large technology companies. Want to work remotely? You are competing with salaries from India and South America. Want a job after you graduate with a degree? Computer science is now the most popular major across almost all universities, and every entry-level position has over 2,000 applicants. Not to mention constantly dealing with people who have no idea what they are doing, especially product managers, who got lucky on an interview in 2022 and have jumped from disaster to disaster every 9 months without producing anything of value. Now they are either sending an artificial intelligence slop business requirement document for your review or committing a pull request that is 100% artificial intelligence generated slop that they did not even look at or test. Non-technical executives constantly make false claims about how they are doing more with less and that artificial intelligence is completely transforming the entire industry, when in reality it is only showing about 20% efficiency gains across everything. Although that does not stop them from not approving any new positions and forcing tighter deadlines. Story 58. Tennis instructor. People think they get to play tennis all day. The reality is you work twice in one day, mornings and after school hours, 6 to 7 days per week. Your meals are at unusual times, you stand all day, and most clubs do not have air conditioning or heating. People want to do the same 2 to 3 drills or games every time. Limited benefits. Story 59. Growing up, our mother converted our house into a bed and breakfast on the weekends. I had to give up my bedroom, make breakfasts, and clean up. So, if you like staying at bed and breakfasts and that leads you to think running one would also be fun, think it through. Story 60. Architecture. There is a reason many people wanted to be architects but pursued careers unrelated to architecture. Story 61. Emergency medicine. I do not know if it is romanticizing, but it is certainly not what people think it is. Thanks a bunch for sticking around till the end of the video. Remember to subscribe, and until next time, stay awesome and goodbye.